Felt for hosting this shir in memory of my grandfather, Yeshayahu Leibowitz. I think it's appropriate that we do Torah study, and um, he was many things, and he was a scientist, a Talmid Chacham, but more than anything, he was a learner of Torah, and um, so I think the best way to commemorate and talk about his legacy is to study Torah. And I picked a subject that I think is interesting. And he revolutionized the understanding of this subject. And the subject is Yemot HaMashiach. And like Rabbi Herzfeld said, if you have questions along the way, so it's a study session, it's not a lecture. So feel free to ask, unmute yourself and then ask. So I would like to ask this concept that is thrown around a lot, that we have heard about it since we were children, but is very vague, I think, in most people's minds. And is it a fact or is it a fiction? And I will show that he analyzed this from a perspective that's fascinating, that's logically coherent. It has beauty, it has inspiration, but it's grounded in reality. Because a lot of the talk about Mashiach is not grounded in reality, in the reality of the human experience, of human nature. But he was able to bring about a new understanding of this concept. And so here we have already Chabad, they jumped on the Mashiach bandwagon. I took this from their website. And so I'm going to talk about I'm going to quote many of his writings and his analyses on this subject. He was born in Latvia in 1903. So he spanned the 20th century. He saw the rise of anti-Semitism in Europe. He witnessed it firsthand. The Gestapo in 1933, after Hitler was elected, saw that he was actively preaching against the Nazi party way before the Holocaust began, just from their fascist tendencies. So one of his friends alerted him, in fact, a famous poet, Leah Goldberg. So he quickly escaped before they reached his door to Switzerland. From there, he emigrated to British Mandatory Palestine, and he lived there ever since. So he lived through the Holocaust, but it is in Palestine. And then he joined the Haganah. He fought in the War of Independence. Became an academic, taught at Hebrew University, was a professor of several different subjects, mostly biochemistry, organic chemistry, and neurophysiology, but wrote extensively also on halacha and emunah and belief and faith. And this is what we're going to talk about today. And as the rabbi mentioned, his yard site was yesterday, so we're going to dedicate it to his memory. Do you see my screen? I think it's paused. Let me try again to share. Okay. So, I think I have to move this. Okay. So what's the traditional understanding of Mashiach? So I think maybe it's fair to say that sometime in the future, a leader will appear and bring about world peace, end of poverty, salvation to the Jewish people. The entire world will worship God. And you can find quotes and psukim related to these ideas. What's the problem with that? Why not? Why not believe in that? Why do we have to talk about this? Why is there a need for a new understanding? So I want to start with a story. And my Saba had great stories, and some of them were jokes, but jokes that have very, very, very sharp point to them, or stories or folk tales that drove a point really well. So I want to start with talk about a story related to the Kaddish. So do you see the the slide with the Kaddish. So the Kaddish that we know, the Ashkenazi Kaddish, or sometimes called the Gra, the Gaon Vilna Kaddish, starts and then B'chayechon. Okay. So right in English, may God's name be exalted and sanctified. It's Aramaic, so I'm translating to English. In the world, that he created Kirutei with his will, and Melech, you know the word Melech, king, his reign, his kingdom will reign in our life, etc. But then came the Hasidim, and they added 4 words. They added 4 words right after the word Malchutei. And what's the words that they added? So if you've been to a Chabad synagogue, you'll hear that in all their Kaddishes. If you've been to a Sephardi synagogue, you'll hear it. If you have a sitter from Chabad or Sephardim. And this created a big rift in the Jewish world. So there were the shuls that, it's like the famous joke, the shul that I will never step into, right? So this is a shul that I will not say these 4 words. And in fact, my father, Alav Shalom, when we lived in Beersheba, we looked for a shul, they don't say these words. What do these words mean? Oh, I forgot to... They mean bring forth his redemption. Pulkan in Aramaic is redemption. So yatzmach, grow, is the redemption or bring forth. And vikarev, from the word karov, bring, hasten, Mashiach. Oh, there's our Mashiach. So in the original Kaddish, it never appeared. But the Hasidim felt, we have to talk about the Mashiach. So we have the Mashiachistim, the people who include these 4 words, and we have the classical Ashkenazim, who don't say those words. And it's important for them not to say those words. Don't talk to us about all kinds of ideas of redemption and maybe it's lulling people into some false belief. So now imagine there's a shul of Ashkenazi German Jews, and of course they say the Ashkenazi version. So they don't say the 4 words, right? So they say, and then in comes to them one day a chassid who has a yard site. So he needs to daven. So he asks them, can I daven before the Amud? Can I lead mincha? So they're sure, they're very welcoming people. They say, sure, go ahead, right ahead. And what does this chassid do? As soon as he starts the Kaddish, he starts, as soon as he says those 4 words, you know what happens? They start screaming, nine. How can you say those 4 words? It would be like somebody at the Republican convention saying, long live socialism. Okay, how can you bring the Mashiach into Ashkenazi shul? So things are getting out of control. People are screaming. So the rabbi, he sees that there's mayhem in the synagogue. So he bangs on the table and he says, which translates to, it's okay. If he wants to come, let him come. The Mashiach, right? We're talking about. So this story...
Great Yiddish. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. So you guys see the slides, right? Bill? Or am I talking without slides?
I see the Yiddish. Yes, it's great.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So don't get so riled up because he just wants he's mentioning the Mashiach. The Mashiach wants to come, you know what? Let him come. But this serves its humor, but now on a more serious note, there are very serious problems with the idea of Messianism. What are the problems? I want to go through them. First of all, the word Mashiach is not mentioned in the Bible, except when describing, I'm going to get to that in a second. So the idea of a Mashiach, of a person coming to bring salvation to the world, doesn't appear in the Torah or in the Tanakh. But there's an even bigger problem. If there was be a situation of world peace, no poverty, no conflicts, does that not contradict human nature? I mean, it's almost like saying we will all be angels. We will turn into something else. Because as long as there are people on earth, a rationalist would tell you there will always be conflicts. There will be wars. There will be fights. There will be violence. There will be crime. To give me a vision that none of that will happen, it's almost like saying we will all be robots. Or if you want a concept from religion, we'll all be angels. How can that possibly be? And maybe an even greater problem, the third one, is that when you start talking about messianism in the real world, you bring about a approach that I call absolutism. So if this is the time of the Mashiach, if this is the time of the Messiah, you know what? Maybe I don't need to conform to the generally accepted norms of the rest of the world because I am bringing about the Mashiach. You know, this is apocalyptic. I can allow myself, you know, things that maybe other nations or most of the nations of the enlightened world consider immoral. Maybe I can disregard international law. I can disregard all kinds of, because I am bringing about the Mashiach. This is a messianic era. This is an extraordinary era. And so people might give themselves excuses, peoples, nations. So that's the third problem that I see with Messianism. So it's not so detached from reality, because in the field of eschatology, what is eschatology, right? This is a term that describes the study of the idea of the end of days. So I want to bring you the definition from Britannica. It's the doctrine of the last thing. It was originally a Western term referring to Jewish, Christian, and Muslim beliefs about the end of history, the resurrection of the dead, the last judgment, the messianic era. And in that field of eschatology, and different religions have it, and we know the Christians have it, one form of it is actually pretty dangerous. That form is called apocalypticism, which promises a sudden cataclysmic intervention by God on the side of a faithful minority. According to this view, this world, unable to bear the justice of God, will be destroyed and replaced by a new world founded on God's righteousness. So here you see how they're actually doing what I just talked about, what I call the absolutism, right? They think, oh, it's okay that there will be these death and this cataclysmic event, destruction all around. You know, they think they give an allowance. I think they have there will be 12,000 Jews from each tribe allowed to live. So we have only 144,000 of us that are allowed to continue to be Jewish. All the rest will be die in this. So already you see that eschatology leads some people, and this is not actually, no, my wife Hagi told me that in her work, she works at NIH, right, a place with rational, you would think rational people, there's people there who believe in this idea of apocalypticism. So I'm not saying that tomorrow they're going to go murder Jews, but it won't take much. It will take maybe a very charismatic leader, and they will go along with this idea that it's okay to kill most of the Jews because this is apocalypticism. We're bringing about the second coming of Yeshayahu, of Jesus. So look how dangerous eschatology, Messianism, or Mashiachiyut in Hebrew can be. So how did my grandfather approach it? So let's go back now to the original word. What does the word Mashiach actually mean? What does it actually mean? Any ideas?
The anointed one or something?
Ah, excellent. So it does not mean, I don't see your face's name, so whoever said that, Ishkoyach. So many people, especially I think non-speakers of Hebrew, think that it means some redeemer, that it means salvation, that it means day of judgment, or the person who does day of judgment. And the answer is no, no, no. What it means, as you pointed out, the verb limshoach in the Torah and the Bible is to anoint, to pour water on somebody's head in order to give him a certain role, a very important role, either a sacred role or a royal title. And the Torah says, yes?
Don't they pour water on when they anoint the King of England or something?
Oh, I think so. Yeah, they did that. I think now with King Charles.
And they anointed kings same in biblical era.
Right. Oh, we'll see a video in a second. But before the kings, the first to be anointed were the Kohanim. The Torah says at the end of the Exodus, "Umashachta otam kasher mashachta et avihem v'chehanu li." In English, and anoint them as you have anointed their father. Who's them? The Kohanim, Aaron's sons. There's only four. There's only Aaron and his four sons at that point, that they may serve me as priests. So that's what the original meaning of the word is. So in the Torah, when you see the word Mashiach, it's actually the high priest. That's the Mashiach, HaKohen Mashiach. So I think maybe they do that in Kings of England, but they don't do that anymore. They don't do that with rabbis, right? Rabbi Shmuel, in your ordination, I don't think they poured oil on your head. So I have breaking news. Rabbi Shmuel.
Definitely not. Definitely not.
So breaking news, Rabbi Shmuel is not the Mashiach.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Right.
Indeed.
So,
Indeed.
So that's the original meaning of the word. And now let's watch a video of the first one to be anointed. Who anointed who and who by whom? So we'll watch. A short video, just quickly.
שמואל פח שמן, משך את
This is Shmuel, the prophet. And who is this?
שאול למלך ואמר, אלוהים.
Who did Shmuel, the prophet, pour oil on?
Saul.
Oh.
אם משך אותך למלך על ישראל, לך לדרכך ועשה את כל מה שאלוהים מצווה עליך לעשות.
So that's the first anointed one. So he is the Mashiach in that sense. So who was the next one to be anointed?
David.
Excellent. David. So let's see. Wait, it's not sharing. Why is it not sharing? One second, let's try again. Okay, so then Saul had problems, was not loyal to God, and but then I wanted to quote to you. So the Shmuel says in Sefer Shmuel, here I am to testify. Here I am, testify against me in the presence of the Lord. He doesn't mean against in the modern English word meaning against. It means in front of me, in the presence of of the Lord, and in the presence of his anointed one. So you see, the word Mashiach in the Bible is the one who was anointed. In that case, it was Saul. And then in the next case, it was David. Well, again, I have problems. Oh, maybe this. Hold on. Oh, I know what the problem is. Okay, so back to our point that they were anointed, they were the Mashiach in biblical terms. Did they bring about world peace? No. Did King David bring about world peace? No. So you see already the original term Mashiach really has nothing to do with bringing about this end of wars, end of conflicts. In fact, I would argue quite the contrary. So King David is prevented from building the temple because, quoting Divrei Hayamim, but the word of the Lord came to, this is David explaining why he was not allowed to build the temple. But the word of the Lord came to me saying, you have shed much blood and fought great battles. You shall not build a house for my name, for you have shed much blood on the earth in my sight. But he was the Mashiach, nevertheless, right? Because he was anointed. So already we see that we can separate the two ideas. The literal meaning, Mashiach is somebody who is anointed. That happened back then. But they did not, certainly did not bring about world peace. They did not bring about this idea of perfection, a perfect world. In fact, King David himself was far from perfect, as we all know. He committed a few very cardinal sins. Then he did tshuva. But so there's not, he still was called the Mashiach when he was anointed. The Navi uses the same word. Okay, but in Tanakh, we do have several prophecies which we can call eschatological, dealing with this idea of end of days. And one famous example is the one from Yeshayahu, chapter 11. And in that chapter, Yeshayahu describes a future of universal peace and brotherhood. In fact, such universal peace and brotherhood that it exists even in the animal kingdom. And let's see some of the, we read this in the Haftarah of Shmini Shel Pesach, Od Hayom Benov La'amod. So one of the verses there is, V'yatzach Hotel Migeza Ishai, V'netzer Misharasha Bifre, V'shafat B'tzedek Dalim, V'ochiach B'mishor La'alvei Aretz. And in English, but a shoot shall grow out of the stump of Jesse. The Spirit of God shall alight upon him, a spirit of wisdom and insight, a spirit of counsel and valor, a spirit of devotion and reverence for God. Thus he shall judge the poor with equity and decide with justice for the lowly of the land. He shall strike down the land with the rod of his mouth and slay the wicked with the breath of his lips. Oh, wait a minute. So this sounds like some person will be the leader who will, it doesn't say world peace, but it does give this idea of there will be this justice across the land. The wickedness and the injustice will be terminated. He'll put an end to all that. And then the verse continues with the famous quote, the wolf shall dwell with the lamb, the leopard with the kid, the calf and the young lion and the fatling together, and the little child shall herd them. So again, I want to bring a story about this. So this seems impossible. This is against not only human nature, but animal nature. But guess what? There in the biblical zoo in Jerusalem, they were actually able to recreate this. And they would bring tourists from America, from all over the world, and they brought them to the cage where they actually had a wolf and a lamb living together. And people would be amazed, and they would take out their checkbooks, all these rich people from America, and they would write checks to the biblical zoo in Jerusalem. Until one day, this grandmother, who she doesn't believe nobody can mess with her. She's a real balaboste. She can tell a fake when it's a fake. She comes up to the madrich. She says to him, "Tell me, Sonny, this can't be. Tell me what's your secret." He says, "Just don't tell anybody, but it's very simple. Every day we bring in a different lamb." Okay, so the story also encapsulates something that again seems to be contradictory to human nature. So how are we to understand this prophecy? The first part we could actually identify with. This is definitely something that we should aspire to. Judge the poor with equity, justice, get rid of wickedness. But then the next part almost seems to negate, to say, well, this is really an impossible world. This can never happen, because as we know, animal kingdom, and this cannot happen in the animal kingdom. So how did my Saba approach these texts and approach the understanding of the era of Messianism? So to understand his philosophy, we have to go back to the Rambam, to Maimonides, and he very much not only adored, but studied extensively and wrote extensively about Maimonides. He has a whole book, The Faith of Maimonides, which was translated into English. So that's a good book I recommend. And Maimonides talks about two planes of service of God. So the first plane, the ideal one, we call it lishma, for the sake of Torah, not for any other reason, including redemption. So in this plane of service, in this theological world, a person never asks, if I perform these commandments, what reward will I get? So now we can, I think, naturally feel that, yes, people who are righteous and people who are not righteous, they will all, they are in the same, the percentages of sickness and of serious diseases are the same among both groups. So we don't do the mitzvahs in order to be healthy, in order to succeed, in order to get rich. In fact, if you do the mitzvot, you have to avoid certain practices which might get you rich. And Niv has a famous story about that, but I'm going to skip his story, how he did the right thing and he lost $500 on a test, which he could have cheated, a test that had prize money. And nobody was looking, and even the teacher wasn't looking. Okay, so that's the ideal, what we call plane of service. But then there is lo lishma, And that lo lishma, the Rambam says, is the one where there's all these blessings and curses, including all the ones mentioned in the Torah and in the Navi. But, says the Rambam, they are similar to a teacher who bribes children to do their lessons with gifts of nuts and candies. So there's nothing wrong, because he knows, the teacher, that this is the only way to get them. But eventually the teacher hopes that they will understand that their value of learning, that they should do their homework, not because of the prizes that he gives in school, but because it's the right thing for them. This is good for them, not for the promises that he gives them or the threats of punishment. And so let's quote one important statement that the Rambam makes. The Rambam says, the end of the truth is nothing but to know it to be the truth. And the Torah is true, and the purpose of knowing it is to observe it, so that one should truly believe truth himself, and that is what's called to serve God out of love. This is a very difficult matter, and not every person can grasp it. So, says the Rambam, we have a second plane. We have a shelo lishma. They therefore permitted the masses, in order to foster their faith, to observe the mitzvot in the hope of reward and to refrain from transgressing for fear of punishment. So all the chapters that you see about these good things that will come to us if we observe the mitzvot, that's only on the second plane. That's not the ideal way, but we have suffered so much, we're going to get to that, in history, that in fact it's almost inevitable that there will be so many people, there will be masses, as the Rambam says, who need this encouragement in order to be loyal to Hashem. And using this framework, this dichotomy of lishma and shelo lishma, and continue on to 600 years later, Reb Chaim of Volozhin, right, the dean of the Volozhin Yeshiva, one of the great Talmudic scholars, my grandfather quoted one of his statements, which is very insightful. So, and very surprising, that comes from such a Talmudic scholar deeply entrenched in the yeshiva world. You won't find these kind of statements from the yeshiva world today. Says Reb Chaim from Volozhin, for the reward of a mitzvah is the mitzvah itself given to one as a reward. And that is the light enveloping him. And he truly sits in paradise, for he is now in the world to come. Reb Chaim of Volozhin says something bold, surprising, almost knocks you off your feet. The Olam Haba, that is now. That is when you do the mitzvah, when you refrain from cheating on the test, when you do your taxes properly, even though you might have the temptation to cheat the government. That is paradise, as he performs the mitzvah. And this is achieved by man himself, for the mitzvah is the very reward. And the light that is paradise, it's in the lifetime of man. And he says this in his commentary on Pirkei Avot. So what so many people think will happen after death, or there's this mystical world, says Reb Chaim Volozhin, no, it's in our world. We bring about the Olam Haba, we bring about Gan Eden, paradise, when we do the mitzvot. It's in here, it's on earth, it's in our lives. So using these quotes, and one more quote from the Tosafot. The Tosafos were the commentaries on the Talmud from the medieval ages in Ashkenaz, in France, Germany. And they said something, we're going back to those statements of Isaiah, right? The statements about this ideal world, the wolf shall dwell with the lamb, there will be justice all over the earth. Well, says the Tosafot, Ein navi mitnabeh ela ma she'ra'ui lihiyot. The prophets only prophesied on what should occur rather than what will occur. What does this mean? That it's something we always are going to aspire to, but will actually not happen. And when we think about that, the prophecy that we read from Isaiah, the wolf and the lamb, the lion, sometimes it's called the lion and the lamb, it makes sense. We know that's not going to happen. But we want to aspire to have peace in the world, that even it's like a guiding post. It's like a North Star that we look up to. We know we're not going to get there. We know animal nature is not going to change. But we want to eradicate violence in the world to the extent that we can imagine in our minds that even the animals will be living peacefully with each other. So we have so much to work on ourselves, but it's only an inspiration to us. It should be an inspiration to us. And this Talmudic statement was a key feature in my Sabba's understanding of the whole idea of the prophecies of the Nevi'im, of the prophets, about the end of days. So now we're going to get to what he said in his books. So he took these ideas that we saw with the Rambam, we saw with the Gaon of Vilna, the Reb Chaim of Volozhin, and we saw it in the Tosafot on Yevamot. And he said redemption is needed only in a lo lishma world. When you are doing the mitzvot, when people do the mitzvot, and it's okay, like the Rambam said, the Torah permitted it. The Torah knows human nature. The Torah knows the psychology of human beings. Some people need that in order to galvanize them to be close to Hashem and to refrain from the sins. So when you're in that world, you need redemption. You need that the God, the deity, is the caretaker of the world, and eventually he's going to bring us to this promised land, quote unquote promised land, where there will be peace, world peace, justice for everybody, no poverty, etc. But in the Lishma world, when the one that was expressed so precisely and concisely by the Volozhin rabbi, the nearness of God is attained in the world as it is, in man's natural mode of existence in the world and in history. So in the Lishma world, when you're doing the mitzvot Lishma, for the sake of heaven, not for any reward, including not for any redemption, then the nation and its individuals have to struggle unceasingly to maintain their way of life, of Torah and mitzvot. Why is it a struggle? Because it's a struggle not to eat non-kosher food when it's all around you. And let's go back into history also. It was such a struggle for Jews throughout history because they suffered from bondage, exile. We suffered suffering. And so throughout our history, all these writings came up, and rabbis who sincerely were trying to help Jews worldwide in these very difficult places, expulsions, what do the Cossacks do? What is it called? Pogroms. So they gave them some hope. They said, you know what, there will be victory in the end of days. This was all a product of the history of our nation, of our people who suffered so much throughout history. And so many people needed it in order to maintain their faith. And that's how we get to these ideas that we find. We do find them in many writings. So my Saba did not ignore it or say it doesn't exist, or even call for removing it from davening. You know, the Reform, they really went to let's say an extreme. And I'm not here to bash anybody. I'm just pointing out differences. They really removed a lot of the eschatological references in davening. My grandfather said, no, we don't need to do that. It's part of our history. It's part of our tradition. It was created to fulfill a psychological need. So all this talk about cosmic events or transition to a better world where there won't be wickedness, won't be oppression, when the restoration of the Torah and the people to their former glory, when all the suffering of Israel will end, when we will return. It's okay to leave that in the Siddur. It's okay. It was part of our tradition. It was done for a psychological purpose, and he never called to remove it. He was very halachic, you know, we should say it. Now, of course, there's different nusach, there's different, you compare the Sephardim to the Ashkenazim to the Yemenites. So, and now there's new Sidurim coming out every year. But he never saw it as a problem to speak about it in Tefillah. But he gave such a revolutionary approach to it and said, that's all part of the Lo Lishma world. And then he also talked again about the dangers. And here he showed he compared Judaism versus Christianity vis-a-vis redemption, vis-a-vis, you know, this idea of Messianism. So he says, you know, while in Christianity, that is a basic tenet of Christianity. And why did they need that? Because they loathe the constant struggle. Remember, we talked about that a Jew he called it unceasingly struggling to maintain a life of Torah and mitzvot. Christianity didn't like that. So they said, you know what? We're going to liberate you from all that struggle. And how are we going to liberate you? There's going to be the coming of the Messiah. Says my grandfather, in Judaism, we don't need all that. we are not going to free ourselves from effort. Yes, it's an effort. It's hard. It's tough. We sometimes fail, but we constantly maintain that effort. And so we don't need this redemption. It's really a Christian idea at its heart. And for us, when we stand before God, when we do the right thing, whether it's mitzvahs ritual, whether it's moral mitzvahs, that is our redemption. That in itself, ipso facto, is our religious redemption. That's how he explained it. And finally, I want to quote some from his book. The Messianic vision tended to undermine the motivation to serve God in the world as it is. But so long as it was unmistakably projected upon the end of days, the obligation to serve God in ongoing history was not affected. On the contrary, it lent courage to many who without it would have despaired. From time to time, however, the historic situation was so difficult to persist in the halachic service to God that the religious consciousness and sensibility turned to the vision of redemption as though it were an article of faith. So he's saying it's really answering a psychological need, because doing halacha is so difficult, especially in the diaspora, suffering from pogroms, from anti-Semitism, from oppression, from discrimination. And so that is like the last straw for some people to hold on to keep them from leaving Judaism altogether. In a sense, it was a form of escape to satisfy the psychological need of the believers. And why is it dangerous? I'm going back to this idea of why there's inherent dangers in talking about it. And I think that so first he mentioned that this is how Christianity arose. We just talked about it. This idea of we need personal salvation. And then in history, as many of you know, we had false messiahs. One of the most famous ones, his name was Shabtai Tzvi, and his movement is called Shabtaut, or Sabbatianism. And he had even rabbis following him. Masses followed him. And what did he build upon? How did he persuade so many? Well, he used this idea of national redemption. So we see that it's a very dangerous and very dangerous slippery slope that you can easily slip into believing false messiahs. And when he came and explained the idea of the end of days, the Messianism, those prophecies that we have in Yeshayahu and in Yechezkel, as really things that will never actually happen, but are just aspirations, then you remove the danger that some charismatic leader, usually, using all the tactics of dictators, will come and create this mass movement and it will be turned out to be a false messiah. And then my grandfather also said those, we do have that a little bit today in the form of Gush Emunim. And he said that when they are converting the service of God from Lishma to the service for the sake of redemption of Israel and its land, when they focus so much on the importance of land, that is a continuation of the Sabbateanism, of the false Messianism, or even, if you go earlier, of Christianity. And so many of you will say, okay, so you're saying all these prophecies are really just, what are you saying? They're opium for the masses. They're never going to happen. They're just like psychological candy that you're giving out to us. Are you insulting our intelligence? No, I don't think so. And I want to give you a mathematical example that it's actually very real. That it actually is a very real idea. But let's watch a video of him, right? So again, to sum up his philosophy, it's that the Messiah will come. Always future tense, never present tense. I want to watch one video of him saying it. It's very powerful. The translation is terrible. I don't know who translated this video. It's wrong. It's wrong. So again, he was talking about future tense. You'll see in a second what I'm talking about. So let me share my screen.
האם אתה מאמין בביאת המשיח?
אני מאותם בני אדם שמאמינים שהמשיח...
Okay, first of all, it's not he capital, right? She's asking you about Mashiach. I don't think we treat Mashiach with a capital H for mistake number one.
יבוא.
מתי?
יבוא. לעולם.
No, not sometime. Wrong translation. Le'olam means,
Whoa.
hold on.
מתי?
יבוא. לעולם.
Will forever. Le'olam is not sometime. Le'olam is forever. It's in the future tense. Mashiach is always will come. Okay, so don't read the translation.
משיח שבא הוא משיח שקר. כל משיח שבא הוא משיח שקר. שמהותו של המשיח הוא שהוא יבוא.
Okay, so Yavo, not will be. The essence of Mashiach is that he will come. I would translate it in the future tense. They put here is coming. That's wrong. You see what they did? Okay, so I want to give you now a mathematical example and end with that. That we see this in the world of mathematics, something that is real, that we can talk about, that is actually very useful in mathematics, but it's something that will never happen. So what am I referring to? I am referring to a graph, a simple graph.
Yes.
Y equals 1 over X.
Yeah.
So now let's see the graph itself, and you'll see what I'm talking about. An aspiration that will never actually happen. Here it is. Do you see the two lines, the two curves?
Yeah,
they are approaching the y-axis, but will never ever touch it. They will get so close, you won't even be able to see the difference. It will look to you as if they're touching it. And the same thing here on the x-axis, right? And this is called the mathematical term. Many of you maybe remember from college, from
the asymptote,
yeah, the asymptote, right? Defined as a line that a curve approaches but never actually touches. I think this is a great example. It's real. It's a real graph. You use it in mathematics. You use it in the world of engineering, of quantum mechanics, of physics. There's nothing imaginary about it. So I think this captures the essence of Mashiach according to my grandfather's view. It's something that holds us as it's an aspiration for us. We should aspire to live in a world free of violence. We should aspire to live in a world where every nation is not oppressed and not subjugated. And we should aspire to live in a world where there is no poverty, where everybody has a decent living. Yeah, and we know it's never going to happen. We know it's like this line, but that should not detract from our struggle to get to that point. So I think with this graph, now you see this is the Mashiach. This is, I think, a perfect way of explaining his idea that, many people were against it. Many people in Israel, learned people, rabbis, I'm not trying to sugarcoat it as if this is very accepted upon the majority of religious Jews or rabbis. But I think for me, it certainly appealed very much. And I had the privilege of talking about it with him, and we discussed it. And he was very, he was so knowledgeable. So you saw a picture of his study with all the books. Maybe we'll bring back his picture. This is just a small fraction. This is like a tenth of his study room, right? There's and he used to, when I visited him, take out books, and we would study the Rambam together. And I never had the opportunity to present him with this idea, the mathematical idea that I showed you. I think he would have liked it. Often you think of things to talk about with great people only after they passed, unfortunately. But I think that it maybe helps to realize that there is meaning in the idea of Mashiach, but without having it to contradict basic nature, without having the dangers of false messianism, without having the dangers of turning to a different religion like Christianity, but yet still see the importance of it and the usefulness of it as long as we interpret it according to his views. And with that, I want to thank you all for joining me. And if there's any questions,
Yasher Koach, yes.